Hello and welcome to day 2 of Verge 22 here in San Jose, California. I'm Deanna Anderson, Senior Editor at GreenBiz Group, and I am joined here by my lovely coworker.
Hi, Deanna. Good morning.
Hello. Good morning.
Hi, everybody. I'm John Schmea. I'm the VP of Circularity and Senior Analyst here at GreenBiz.
Yes, and in case you missed it yesterday, there's a rotating co-host thing happening here on Sidebar. And if you're not familiar with Sidebar, it is what happens before the keynotes start at our events. So we'll have a series of conversations with people in the climate tech space. And with that, what are you looking forward to today?
I'm excited about a lot of things on the keynote stage today, but one of them in particular is this talk about exploring the depths of the ocean. We've got Don Wright, Alani Wilhelm, and Kakani Khatija speaking on that. It's going to be pretty exciting.
Yes, I'm also looking forward to that. And if you have questions for that keynote, please let us know. Tweet us using the hashtag Verge22. I am personally looking forward to hearing from Jennifer Granholm, who will be joining us virtually. Sad that she's not here live, but she will be speaking about what the Biden-Harris climate agenda means for communities.
Yeah, it's going to be great.
Yeah, so Verge is about halfway through at this point. We also have other events.
Yes.
Circularity
coming up June 5th through the 7th in Seattle. We're very excited about it. We've got a bunch of great partners up there, great venue, hoping to get a lot of people up to Seattle for that conference in June.
Yeah. So it'll be your first one where you were like here from the beginning. How does that feel?
It's a little stressful. Fortunately, I've got my counterpart Suzuki, who's been here for it before, to help me plan. But yeah, we're just ramping up some real busy planning now. So looking forward to it.
Awesome. We'll hear more from John and me later. But for now, here's an ad from our sponsors.
Responsibility we feel at Boeing is really to help aerospace grow and grow sustainably. We want to see the societal benefits of this industry, whether they're commercial, national security, or humanitarian and peacekeeping operations. We want to see that continue, but we have to see it grow more sustainably.
Businesses need to go net zero now, but the path to net zero isn't always clear. Meet Net Zero Cloud. Reducing carbon emissions is everyone's business. Let's break down silos between companies and their suppliers and customers. Let's empower employees with easy tools that make them part of the solution. Let's do it with data and real insight. Let's lead with trust through the greatest challenge of our lifetime.
Oh, you do?
The 2020s is the decade of transformation towards a clean energy future. By sharing innovations, solutions, and ideas, we can close the emissions gap. Let's transition faster together.
We are back with Dea Bayumi, who is the Vice President of Global Product Management at Bloom Energy. Welcome to Sidebar.
Thank you, Dale. Nice to meet you. Thank you.
Yeah. So can you share a little bit about Bloom and what your team has been up to?
Sure. So Bloom Energy have been supporting the communities and the industry of transitioning to energy, to clean, sustainable energy, and make it affordable to all. So we have a technology based on a platform with solid oxide fuel cell, and we have been focusing on power generation, creating the non-combustion clean energy with no SOx, no NOx, and really trying to move the industry toward a resilient transition, sustainable solution. At the same time, we actually have a platform for hydrogen production and focusing on producing the hydrogen in the most efficient way, but also use it in the most efficient way. So Bloom Energy in both sides of the equation, driving the positive climate change and energy transition and energy resiliency toward this net zero and zero carbonization solution.
Very interesting. Well, I think we all sort of recognize the need for resiliency given what's happened over the last couple of years. What are some of the factors that are really compelling your customers to look at resiliency as a solution as they look forward to the future?
Yes, so weather changes, as you saw. We had weather events in Louisiana, in Texas, definitely in California, droughts and water issues. So definitely that require really customer to really keep the power on. As you see now, power is not a want anymore, it's a need. It's an urgent need for us to survive and function. We have solutions where we really start looking at how we really bring all it together clean, sustainable energy, make it affordable to all. So really bringing the energy in a distributed manner. We have a microgrid solutions to make sure that we really meet the customer needs and wants here. At the same time, we're decarbonizing and we don't have water actually needs for our systems to run. So we're really looking at it comprehensively, and from the foundation, from our founder and CEO and chairman, K.R. Sridhar, that have been the mission and the vision that power up everyone in Bloom, wake up every morning. How can we make this clean energy, sustain energy, and make it really affordable to all? So the affordability is a key part and the access is a key part for us. That's all the factors that the customer are looking for. Bloom is really trying to address them all in more practical manner.
Got it. So can you share some real-world examples of resiliency events and also projects that have been implemented to address those events?
Yes, we have several deployments. Right now we have, by end of the year, will be close to 800 megawatts, a significant installation around the globe, majority in California, Northeast, and we have Korea and Japan, and we did the first installation in Europe as well, with Ferrari factory. Familiar with the rolling blackout we have in California because of the droughts and the severe weather events. So we have several data center customers where they lost power for 5.5 days. Without the Bloom solution, they wouldn't have sustained the power. And data center is no longer just for transactional. It's the backbone where we share data for healthcare, for really survival in general. So we kept the light on for this. We have several events with Nugget stores, for example, and other stores where you can keep the line on, where the grocery store give access to the community. They can get to the parking lot safely, they can get to their food safely. Sandy was another event that happened in the Northeast where it really was profoundly impactful to the overall community. Our system there functioned. The more distributed, the more really running on that solid oxide platform. The microgrid techniques we have really enable the smarts, really make sure that we keep the light on. All the solutions really are practical examples where we kept the energy flowing and the power flowing while we're keeping the air clean, while we're keeping the water conservation, where we're keeping really the lights on.
It's very cool. We've got about a minute left. I'm curious what you see, what you're excited about in the next 5-10 years for Bloom. Is it scale? Is it new technology? What are you really looking forward to?
Yes, all of it. Bloom Energy, if I'm saying it again, make clean, sustainable energy affordable to all. That powers up everyone there. So we have a remarkable team of innovative, really engineers, scientists, and industry expertise. What power everyone on is Bloom Energy is full of positive energy with the mission that we have. So everyone wakes up in the morning saying, how are we going to make this new innovative? How are we going to make it a unique solution? How are we going to make it affordable to everyone? So lots of innovation coming from Bloom. We opened a larger factory here in Everett and Fremont, California, multi-mega giga factory. We have another one in Delaware, so scalability and expansion is another thing that we look at. So innovation, scalability, expansion. Industry access, actually, we are pushing the industry and pulling it towards power generation in a clean way, but also hydrogen production in the most efficient way.
Awesome.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us at Sidebar. We look forward to staying in touch with Bloom Energy and learning about what you do in the next few years.
Thank you for having me and looking forward to the rest of the event. Thank you.
Dan.
All right. Now, a word from our sponsors.
CarbonCure's technologies permanently store carbon dioxide in concrete. We're transforming concrete plants into carbon removal factories, delivering permanent, verifiable, and immediate carbon storage, while building a greener future.
Who would have thought printing could lead to growing trees?
It all started with our corporate sustainability goals. We started exploring big options, saying, what team do we want to work with? And that's where Duke Energy Sustainable Solutions came in. If you want to change something, the first thing you got to do is start.
Hey, welcome back to Sidebar. We're joined now by Drew Wenzel, development executive and of You have a long title, Drew. Development Executive and District Systems, Entitlements, and Water Lead at Google. That's a mouthful. Thanks for joining us, Drew.
Thank you for having me.
I'd like to start sort of high level here. What does it actually mean for a building or a campus to be water positive?
So, to be water positive, essentially that means you are generating more water than you consume. And for us at our Bayview campus, we kind of take a split between the potable side and the non-potable side. So at that campus, we are non-potable water positive. So we are producing more recycled water on site than we have non-potable water demands.
Got it. So what are some tactics that the campus at Bayview can take to get water positive? I'm guessing there's some low-hanging fruit, but also like what are some challenges there as well?
Sure. I mean, like any good sustainability story, it all starts with efficiency. I mean, how can you reduce your water consumption as much as possible? The easy ones are fixtures, but also being very thoughtful around your landscape planting palette. And, you know, making sure your team, everybody who touches water on a new project or even into operations, gets together and works together on creating a full kind of water balance for the site. What are your sources? What are your demands? And making sure that you are bringing those into alignment as much as possible. But really only when you've squeezed all that efficiency out should you really start looking at what can you supplant on site? How can you meet your other remaining demands with other resources you may be able to generate locally?
Yeah, it's a great point. I think too often people forget about the reduce part of the equation.
Yes.
So I haven't lived in California since 2012, so a full decade, but I know there's still a serious drought going on
There
here.
is.
What kind of opportunities and challenges does a drought like this present to a water positive facility?
Well, you know, I think more broadly in the region, it's a really big opportunity for innovation and really trying to bring some of these nascent water treatment and reuse technologies into implementation. You know, for the facility in particular, it allows us a little bit more flexibility from a business continuity standpoint and protects us against some of the potential rate hikes that could be in everybody's future. But you know, it is the right thing to be doing at this time, and we want to see more of these on-site treatment and reuse systems proliferate across the region. So I think our real opportunity right now is to share what we've done at the Bayview campus and make this, demystify it for everybody who might be thinking about this, or regulators or operators who see this as something coming in their future too.
Mm-hmm. So you said you wanted to share. What are like the main highlights or learnings that you all have come to when trying to get to water positivity?
Well, I think one of the big wins of this campus is that, you know, there's nothing that is single purpose. I mean, we have major opportunity to capture all of the storm and rainwater that falls on the site, but those ponds are also creating really meaningful habitat at the edge of the bay as well. Habitat in some cases, like the willow sossels, that have been really decimated over decades of development. So it's finding those kind of intersections of opportunity, I think, as well.
Yeah.
In addition to all the water, quantification and reuse that you can do with that.
Yeah, and I know, obviously you don't need to comment on it, but I know there's a lot of other really interesting sustainability things going on at the Bayview campus. So, people should check out anything they can find on that campus, because it's a good learning on how to make a building more sustainable, a campus more sustainable.
Yeah, we just searched for Google Bayview. We have a fantastic site that was built to kind of share all of that information.
Awesome.
Amazing. Are there any things that you are paying attention to in the space when it comes to other companies trying to be water positive?
You know, there are really great emerging regulations coming from the state and the public sector to secure the potable water side of things, which is so important. I think that really we're trying to position ourselves to support the public side in the potable water security and do as much as we can on the non-potable side. So I think we'll probably just see more and hopefully bigger examples of the systems that we have at Bayview, and we're hoping to do more of that as well.
Awesome.
Great. Thank you so much, Drew, for joining us at Sidebar. Now a word from our sponsors.
supply chain can be a tricky game of opportunity and risk, and selecting which green initiatives to invest in only makes things more complicated. Developed by Thoughtworks, Strategy Augmented is a human-centric methodology, allowing you to explore the potential impacts of strategic initiatives like sustainability. From carbon emissions to operating costs and profitability, users of Strategy Augmented can play what if at a collaborative level. Leveraging machine learning, users in any industry can map out their organization and test variable changes to discover and optimize alternative futures, which helps build a sustainability roadmap with quick wins and longer-term initiatives that accelerate progress towards net zero. Strategy Augmented is Thoughtworks' approach to solving your organization's sustainability what-ifs. And when you can solve the what-ifs, you can achieve the extraordinary. Visit thoughtworks.com for more.
We are joined by Carolina Garcia, who is the Global Sustainability Innovation Director at AB InBev and Anheuser-Busch InBev. Welcome to Sidebar.
Thank you. I'm super happy to be here.
Yeah, so AB InBev has set out on some very aggressive 2025 sustainability goals. We'd like to hear about your work on them today. Can you start with talking about your smart agriculture?
Of course, as you know, at AB InBev, we work directly with many farmers across the world, around 22,000 farmers across the world. And our goal by 2025 is to have the most skilled, connected, and financially empowered. And we have reached over more than 60% of that goal already. So now we're looking to go beyond and above that. And one of the key things is through innovation, help them transition to regenerative agriculture. So for example, we now have pilots in France and in Mexico where we're helping our farmers transition to regenerative agriculture and get the carbon credits out of that as an extra income that will incentivize these practices.
Nice. I love hearing people speak so enthusiastically about regenerative ag. It's such a big deal, and I think it's underappreciated. So as the leader of Team Circularity here at GreenBiz, I'm always excited when companies like yours come out with big packaging commitments. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how you're thinking about packaging in the future.
Of course, packaging for us is very important. It's actually the most important source of emissions for us. And we have a very ambitious commitment where we want that by 2025, all of our packaging to be either returnable or made out of recycled content. And we are doing this. We have already more than 50% of recycled aluminum and more than 40% of recycled glass and more than 30% of our packaging across the world is returnable. However, we also need to innovate to reach these targets. This is why we're partnering with startups all across the world, and some of them, in fact, are helping us increase our post-consumer waste collection, because having 100% recycled packaging, it's easier said than done. You need to work with waste pickers, you need to work with consumers, everyone to actually get that post-consumer waste back.
Yeah. Not to mention regulators who are going to make it harder to use recycled content.
I actually have a follow-up question about the packaging. I'm also a circularity person in a way, and I'm curious about, you mentioned working with other startups to make sure that your packaging goals, that you reach them. Can you share any specifics about what that has looked like?
Of course. So first, I would talk about the 100 Plus Accelerator, which is our signature program. We launched it in 2018 to actually help us reach our global sustainability goals, and we partner with startups all across the world that are solving pressing sustainability challenges. And now we're not only doing it alone, we also partner with Coca-Cola, with Unilever, and with Colgate-Palmolive. So on the circular packaging space, we have millions of examples, but I'll give you a couple of ones. So for example, with Recibesi, is a startup in Ecuador, woman-founded, and they created an app that actually connects grassroots recyclers with citizens, so they can give the post-consumer waste directly to recyclers. But we're also working with other startups. For example, Solutum is a startup in Israel that is helping us create an alternative to single-use plastic so we can replace the stretch film in our packaging, and it's working with Corona, one of our most beloved brands around the world.
Nice. All right, well, Diana and I both love to talk about circularity, but it wouldn't be Verge without a question about climate goals. So how's AB InBev doing on those climate goals that you have?
Well, climate, it's a very important goal for us, of course, and we have a science-based target aligned with a 1.5 degree scenario where we committed to reduce 25% of our emissions by 2025, but we also announced our zero net emission ambition by 2040. And with the 100 Plus Accelerator, we're also delivering on these targets. So right now, the company has already contracted, for example, more than 80% of its electricity out of renewable sources. But we want to innovate. So for example, we're now working with a startup in China called Sunman that produces ultra lightweight solar panels, 70% lighter and also flexible. And now you wouldn't imagine the pictures that we have of our breweries in China, in Wuhan, of solar panel covering the tanks. I just find it fascinating.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I definitely want to see those pictures. It also sounds like a lot of partnership and innovation is needed for you all to do your work, which is exciting. Thank you so much for joining us on Sidebar. We look forward to staying in touch with AB InBev.
Yeah,
Thank you so much for having us and looking forward to keep connecting at Verge.
Awesome.
Now a word from our sponsors.
ServiceNow is enhancing our solutions to help you achieve your goals. With the ServiceNow platform, you can mobilize ESG enterprise-wide, setting strategy and budget, tracking investments, and managing your data, all while tracking performance against goals. ServiceNow gives you data visibility in one place, so you can simplify the reporting process, identify opportunities for innovation, and respond to ESG performance and risks faster.
Welcome back to Sidebar. We are excited to be joined by Amanda Von Ullman, Director of Emissions Reductions at Salesforce. Thank you so much for joining us here at Sidebar. Let's start just by talking a little bit about your role. Director of Emissions Reductions for Salesforce. What does that look like?
Yeah.
What are you working on?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me here today. It's great. So, zooming out just a little bit, at Salesforce, we're really bringing the full power of our company to address three key areas in the fight against climate change. And it's really accelerating the world to net zero, leading a nature-positive movement, and also energizing what we're calling an ecopreneur revolution in innovation. And so when we really zoom in on the net zero portion, reducing emissions is our first priority. We've set a goal to reduce absolute emissions by 50% by 2030. It won't be easy, but it's what the planet needs and it's where we need to go. And so my team really focuses on first forecasting out where emissions are going within our company, what internal and external business drivers are going to potentially impact those emissions, and then really looking at quantifying ways in which we're going to achieve those reductions. And so we work with an incredible cross-functional team of business unit leaders that are focusing on the main parts of our business that really are emitting carbon. So business travel, infrastructure, data centers, things like that, real estate, the beautiful offices that we occupy, things like that. And then, of course, our supply chain, which makes up actually the biggest part of our emissions.
Mm-hmm. With many employees still working remotely and many wanting to return to the office, how does this impact the considerations you take in doing the annual forecasting for your carbon footprint?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say kind of before, emissions were largely within that particular space coming in our offices and our office buildings and commuting. And now emissions have really shifted in this hybrid world and you're seeing more people working at home. And so that's only going to grow over time as more and more people continue to work from home. Of course, we want people to come in, to collaborate, to really build community with their teams. But when they're working from home and as that particular part of the pie continues to grow, how do we address those emissions? So we are measuring them because that's the first step in that. So we survey our employees annually to really understand the emissions that are coming from home. Obviously, there's reduced emissions because they're not commuting as much. But then what sort of enablement, education, incentives, things like that can we really put into place? But also, too, with forecasting, it's a bit of guessing on, in 10 years how many people will be working from home. versus decided that they want to come into the office a bit more, right? So we're constantly adjusting our forecasts and taking in new data and really relying on those surveys to understand, the trends when it comes to those shifting emissions.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess, there's a little bit of a challenge with where people are working and how they're working. And given that Salesforce has been working on, climate initiatives, carbon reduction for quite some time and probably has addressed a lot of the low-hanging fruit, where are your biggest challenges now? How do you get to that end goal?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. I mean, really, the challenge comes from the emissions we don't directly control, right? Yeah. So our supply chain. And we've set a goal that 60% of our suppliers by emissions will set science-based targets and reduce in line as well. But how do we get them there? We really have to influence and bring them on that journey. And so a really incredible tool that we introduced last year to help us get there is our supplier sustainability exhibit. And so that's really negotiating into contracts with existing suppliers and any new suppliers that we would really like them to set we want them to set science-based targets. Yep. We want them to measure and disclose their own greenhouse gas emissions so that they can start on their journey to reduce. We have them submit an improvement plan and really just holding us mutually accountable to hitting these goals with our suppliers. But yeah, the hardest part is the ones you have to influence, right? The ones that you have to use many other different tools in the toolkit that are more indirect.
Yeah. So in our last moments with you, are there any first steps you would tell companies to do if they want to get started today?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we need everybody all in. It's a now or never moment, as so many of us know. And so what does your organization, what are your unique skill sets? What is your superpower that you can bring to this fight? And don't be afraid to get started, right? We just need people to take action, to get going on their journey, and really utilize what they do best in this fight.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us at Sidebar. You've been hearing from Amanda von Alman, who is the Director for Emissions Reduction at Salesforce. And now you will hear a word from our sponsors.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Amanda.
Small, family-owned forests are vulnerable to harvest, unable to participate in traditional carbon markets. Support communities and the climate with NCX, a new kind of forest carbon market.
The path to ESG maturity starts with EHS. Today, business leaders are challenged to manage ever-increasing complexities in their operations. We understand these challenges because we've been providing solutions for 50 years. VelocityEHS is your partner in ESG management, tracking the data you need to deliver superior outcomes.
Make it for a more agile, resilient supply chain while helping to protect the planet. Because whatever you're making, we'll help you make it better so you can make it for life.
Every action can have far-reaching consequences. Making a positive impact on the world is at the heart of all we do at Amgen. We've pioneered greener, more efficient ways to operate, creating greener ways to conduct research and development, and a new way to manufacture medicines, to conserve water, curb carbon emissions, reduce solid waste, and operate with a dramatically smaller footprint. And our impact will be felt far and wide.
All right, so we heard from a lot of folks today already, and we're about to hear from more on the keynote stage. We highlighted a couple of conversations earlier that will be happening, but there are a few more that I'm excited about. What are you excited about?
I really loved the over-under yesterday on the first day of the keynote, so I'm really looking forward to hearing from our own two Verge analysts, Sarah Golden and Isaac Knipping, on over and under-hyped topics in both electrification and the built environment. Really excited about that.
Yeah, that should be cool. I feel like our analysts are really great at really identifying what is happening in their respective spaces. I am also looking forward to Charisma AC, who is an associate professor at the University of California at Berkeley. She'll be talking about centering the voices of frontline communities, which I think is always important for these conversations. Yeah, it's vital.
Yeah, it is vital. I'm really excited about that one too.
Yeah, so we are about to get started. Don't forget to tweet us your questions using the hashtag Verge22.
At Green Day, it's nice.
Welcome Green Biz CEO Eric Thoreau to the stage.
I gotta say that music was a little cheesy for my intro, but I'm gonna go with it. I can't tell you how incredibly excited I've been the last 2 days. I actually Googled, can you get too much serotonin naturally? And not to worry, it's very rare, very, very rare. I was really struck for the last 2 days of how many people I've chatted with, one, just hugging old friends and making new friends. How many people talked about, like, I've been here since the first Verge. So a quick little experiment. How many people were at Verge when we had it in San Francisco 10 years ago? Show of hands. Okay, how many people were down here in the South Bay, either in San Jose or in Santa Clara? Okay, how many people were in Oakland when we were in Oakland? Okay, and now how many people, this is the first time you've been to Verge? Wow. So, I say to all of you, welcome home. We are incredibly excited to have you be part of this community. And if you've been here before, I've heard people say, it seems like it's gotten a lot bigger. Well, your eyes aren't deceiving you, it has. We've basically doubled since we were here last in Oakland. And we've been very busy. So I'm gonna just take a few minutes to tell you what we've been up to. So we've galvanized our mission. We empower professional communities like yourselves to confront the climate crisis. How we do that is we embrace servant leadership. And servant leadership is a really profound but simple concept of you serve because you lead, and you lead because you serve. And that has really been impactful to me and to our team, and that's how we think about how we show up every day and how we show up for you guys. And one of the cool things we do in that is showing the thing. So one of the things I'm the most proud about is every year at Verge, we've built a 100% renewable microgrid. So this stage is powered by 100% renewable power that we create outside, put through batteries, and it's brought in here. We're showing the thing. Thank you. It's my side hustle. It's my favorite part of the show. Make sure you go out and check out all the cool tech out there. And the other thing we really aligned around was the 4 markets. These are a concentric circle. They all have a unique, sort of persona to them, if you will. We have a leading event for each one of these. We have peer networks for all of these, and we have digital media for all of these. And we're really committed to scaling our business so we can confront the climate crisis with all of you. So thank you so much for being here. And with that, we will get on to the show. So I'm excited. Data is at the core of this and has been from the very beginning of Verge. I'm excited to bring Gavin McCormick to talk about turning on the lights. Gavin, give a warm welcome, please.
Have you ever felt climate despair or hopelessness? I know I have. We're here at a really exciting event, but the reality is that what's going on to our planet is terrifying. The entire civilization as we know it is at risk, and our actions can seem like a drop in the bucket. Just today it came out that the governments of the world are not doing enough. It turns out we need to be moving even faster. But I would like to submit to you that what we have gotten used to for the last 30 years of the climate fight is we've gotten used to the idea that it is even harder than it really is. And I think that's been going on because we have been essentially fighting climate change in the dark. Let me explain what I mean by that. So we've known for many years what's going on in the atmosphere. We can see the amount of emissions that we have. So the data we have on climate change essentially functions as a glorified alarm system. What it tells us is we should be freaking out. This is a method to have data tell us how bad the problem is, and we all know exactly what we need to do about it. That number, 52 billion tons, we need to get it to zero, and we have about 28 years to do it. This is not news. But what this doesn't tell you is how. The emissions data we have today is really primarily focused on measuring the scale of the problem, not pointing towards easier ways to solve it. And I think that is changing radically in this 3-year window, where we are seeing hundreds of new satellites launched by government agencies and private corporations around the world that are using Earth observation for the first time to radically increase what we know about emissions. The first thing this is going to do is make it possible to point fingers at who are the bad guys, to track progress a little bit more easily. This kind of granularity and other information will certainly make it easier to have a better and better alarm system. But I think the really interesting thing it's going to do is it's going to give us a lot more information about climate solutions that are easier, faster, cheaper, and more reliable than we're used to. So let me give you an example. Methane, it's a super pollutant. It's maybe 30 times as potent as CO2. We also pipe it around in high pressure pipelines, which means that when you get one leak, you could have a massive amount of this leak going into space, and the sky can be filled with this super pollutant in a very short amount of time. So we all know, of course, that we need to fix these leaks. But what you have to think about is how. So this is new satellite-based information that allows us to see where the leaks are. Methane is invisible to the naked eye. Both the right type of infrared camera, you can see it. This means that if you are thinking about sort of the 6 different areas on a grid that you might need to scan every day to look for leaks, instead you can just go to 1. And instead of physically visiting them every day, you can actually know exactly when a leak is happening and going there. Why is that interesting? Well, one thing you could say is we just lowered the cost of reducing emissions. But I would like you to think for a second about a different way of conceptualizing that same fact. Another way to say it is for the same level of effort and cost we've been doing already, which it looks like is guaranteed to increase. So we as a society are certainly going to keep putting at least as much effort as we've been putting into this as before. We just multiplied the amount of emissions that we can reduce per dollar or per unit of activity through data. And I think this is not a new concept for people in Silicon Valley. What we are doing is we are shifting from one area to another, and we are making it possible to reduce about 500 million tons of CO2 equivalent by taking the actions we are doing right now and making them more effective. We know this concept in Silicon Valley because targeted advertising works the same way. It's the case that some of the most powerful companies in the world today, Google, Meta, and so on, what they do is they gather the same techniques we were already using in advertising, and with data, they make it possible to reach more people, more impact, and we use data as multiplier. I think what's about to happen over the next 2 years is we're going to see a supercharged version of that happening suddenly in the climate fight. It means existing climate solutions are about to get a lot more powerful than we are accustomed to. Take steel. Steel is one of the most emitting sectors in the global economy. If you look at a steel mill from space using traditional methods, this is what you see. It doesn't give you very much information. But you switch to thermal infrared, and what you can see with information provided by the nonprofit Transition Zero is actually the hot spots that are literally the industrial processes causing these emissions. Why is that interesting? Because steel mills vary about 5x in how much emissions they cause per ton of steel. So this puts an entirely new, very straightforward solution on the table. Because this is one of the cleaner steel mills in the world, it is possible to switch from buying from another steel mill to this one. If you're a major auto manufacturer, if you are a construction firm, we now have data all over the world on every steel mill's carbon intensity. And it makes it very, very straightforward as we are building green solutions to find quick, easy ways to have lower carbon intensity steel. This has, by my calculations, a 2.1 billion ton CO2 equivalent per year impact potential. So the reason this is interesting is we're now counting about 4% of climate change with this one solution, and it's one of many. So Transition Zero is a member of the Climate Trace Coalition, as am I, where a large number of startups, universities, and nonprofits are starting to provide equivalent data for almost everything that emits on the planet. Shipping is another example. OceanMind is now able to track, and in 2 weeks will be providing to the world, the carbon intensity per nautical mile traveled, or per unit of cargo that you want to take from one continent to another, for every single ship. This puts on the table the possibility of switching from one ship to another. That package that you're ordering from China, that Amazon purchase, it's going to now be possible to choose to get it from a cleaner vessel. Now that's particularly interesting in the case of shipping because most of the carbon footprint of a ship actually comes from how they operate it. So if we all start prioritizing cleaner shipping, it is very, very easy to modify the operations of the vessel with no new capital to lower that carbon footprint. That puts on the table about a 0.2 billion ton of carbon dioxide equivalent solution. You start to add these up in other sectors like electricity. So my organization, WattTime, what we track is what is the carbon footprint not just of different power plants, but of that same power plant over time. So we can see in images like this, when the steam plume means that this power plant is emitting. Why is that interesting? Take something like an electric vehicle. An electric vehicle is slightly cleaner than a gasoline car if it runs on coal. But if you can time the charging of that electric vehicle to a moment when the coal plant is turned off and the renewable energy power plants are turned on, you can multiply the emissions benefit of that same piece of equipment. You can do this with software, and the carbon potential of this is about 0.4 billion tons. But I include this example because it's a good example of how fast this can scale. Over the last 30 days, 1 billion new devices worldwide have hooked up to this technology. At this rate, by the end of the year, 10% of all smart devices on the planet are going to be running this technology. So from Honda electric vehicles to Nest thermostats to Microsoft devices, this technology is now reducing emissions. And we saw that increase so fast, I suspect it's going to be very similar in a number of sectors very quickly. Similarly, renewable energy. How does a solar panel help the environment? It doesn't suck emissions out of the atmosphere. What it does is it replaces other power plants. And so a solar panel in, say, California replaces a gas plant often, sometimes another solar panel. That exact same solar panel in Montana will typically displace a particularly dirty coal plant. That means that if you choose to build a new solar farm not in California as you were planning, but in Montana, in the real world for the same capital cost and the same amount of electricity, you just doubled your climate effect. We're seeing organizations like Salesforce, Clearloop, and Nucor start to deploy this technique, which I like to call emissionality, taking that same renewable energy and increasing the real world emissions benefit of everything it's doing. This one solution has a technical potential of 4.3 billion tons, so that's more than the carbon footprint of Europe, that could be permanently taken off the map just by changing the locations of some facilities. We also have examples like Google Maps. So I don't know about anyone else, but I got here today by traveling on Google Maps. This is a screenshot of my phone routing me to the airport. If you look closely, you can see that the blue line, the recommended route it took me on, is a little bit slower but has a lower carbon footprint than the gray line. Google has quietly adopted the technique of defaulting users to the lowest carbon footprint route. It's an effortless, simple way. It might increase your route by 1 minute sometimes, but it magically makes it possible for us to all have a lower carbon footprint. So I don't think that this 0.1 billion tons of carbon potential by switching routes is going to single-handedly solve climate change. I don't even think that data alone that I'm telling you about is going to single-handedly solve climate change. But the thing is, it doesn't have to. Fundamentally, we all know that climate change is a team sport. And I think what is happening now is the massive increase in the availability of high-quality emissions data means that we're all going to be able to punch a little bit harder. The solutions that I alone know of make it possible for about 20% of climate change to be solved with data by multiplying the efficacy of existing solutions with existing capital stock at existing costs. I, however, am just getting started at this, and I suspect I am a small, small part of what is about to be a much broader ecosystem. So I wanted to submit to everyone here that knows exactly how to use data to drive more impact, that a generational change in the availability of high-quality climate data is around the corner. Over the next 2 years, you are going to see more data than you have ever seen on exactly where emissions are coming from, and exactly how they could be different, and exactly how different facilities and actors are different. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what you come up with. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gavin. Well, good morning, everyone. Happy Wednesday. So for those of you who have read Ministry of the Future, you know how profound the emerging landscape of climate fiction can be in seeding pretty world-changing ideas. And that said, the concept of the carbon coin featured in that book is far from science fiction. I am so delighted to welcome to the Verge stage the internationally acclaimed author Kim Stanley Robinson, the originator of the carbon coin concept, joining us from all the way down under, Delton Chen, and the one and only climate tech investor and podcaster, Miss Molly Wood. Welcome.
Thank you. Good
Good morning, everyone. I can only assume that this is as much a treat for you as it is for me. This is a huge day as both a finance nerd, a longtime sci-fi reader, and brand new investor. Thank you both for allowing me to moderate this brief conversation with you. So I want to jump in. I'm going to start with Stan and ask sort of the origin story question. How did this concept of the carbon coin come to your attention, but more importantly, end up in your book as such a powerful exercise in the way that finance can affect major change?
Well, I am a utopian science fiction writer, and it's an odd thing. And I wanted to write a novel that put all my cards on the table and described the next half century going well. It's a difficult situation that we're in, and my bar for success has gotten lower as the decades have passed. If we dodge a mass extinction event, that's a utopian outcome at this point. And I think it can be done, and you can see the technical solutions are out there. Many of you represent and are working on the technical solutions. And what occurred to me was we don't have a good way to pay for them. That investment capital goes to the highest rate of return. The highest rate of return is poorly calculated for long-term biosphere health, among other problems with it. And so I began to look around. Well, how could you get people to pay for the necessary work to decarbonize the world quickly and encourage biosphere health all around? So I've ran into a paper, Hypothesis for a Risk Cost for Carbon, by Dalton Chen. It was online, a Springer Verlag article, and it described a method by which the central banks essentially did a kind of quantitative easing, you might say, that was carbon quantitative easing that was directed towards good, green, biosphere healthy, decarbonizing projects that the initial creation of the money by the central banks would be paid first for those. This was what I took out of Dalton's paper. I based the entire plot of the Ministry for the Future, or the major plot, was based on the idea that a minister for the future, a UN functionary, convinced the leaders of the central banks to indeed adopt and deploy that program. And I believe very strongly that this is one of the reasons why my novel has been taken up with such enthusiasm over the last couple of years. It seems to suggest that there's a viable plan, that it could be done, that it could be paid for, and that we could squeak by. And people want that story.
And then Dr. Chen, Dalton, welcome. When did you find out that your idea had been adapted in this way? How did it feel, and what has it led to since? Because now it's a movement.
Well, I heard about Stan's novel in writing in 2019 when he contacted me. He asked me to do a review. So he'd written the manuscript, and my job was to check it, basically. And I did that. It was a very interesting process, a very thick book, by the way, so it was a lot of work, but I enjoyed it.
And he didn't pay you at all, did he? I'm just kidding.
Yes. It was a bit of
He's in the acknowledgements.
It was a bit of a surprise to be dealing with a science fiction novel, but in reality, when you develop a policy, it's storytelling. It's economic storytelling, it's political storytelling, and indeed the genesis of the policy, way before I met Stan, was storytelling to discover how to use a currency that's a parallel currency to resolve the free rider problem. So the key point here is about a currency, carbon currency, or carbon coin in the novel, is that it's a mechanism that is untapped. Economists aren't really thinking about it or talking about it, and it's so powerful because it's a way of funding at speed and scale climate mitigation through monetary policy that avoids creating more debt. And by avoiding debt, by avoiding directly charging citizens, businesses and governments, I think it will solicit much more cooperation. It's about attacking that free rider problem, providing funding at speed and scale. We're talking trillions, at least 3 trillion, maybe 4 or 5 trillion. Think about carbon dioxide removal. That's a big bill. We're talking over $1 trillion. And so this whole idea hasn't really been explored. And it connects with other ideas too, such as decentralization, the ability to use blockchains, if you really love blockchains, and collecting information from markets and sharing it back. So there's a lot going on here that hasn't been explored.
Yeah. How did you come to this, by the way? Are you an economist by training? Sort of explain how you arrived to be the guy who wrote the paper.
I call myself an interdisciplinary analyst. Because
an interdisciplinary analyst. I'm stealing that.
I'm not an economist by training. I'm an engineer by training. My confidence in this comes from problem solving. So I'm used to looking at complex problems, trying to find solutions, and where I begin is the conceptual model. And I was suspicious that the standard economic model was missing some concepts, because we have so many problems in the economy, don't we? For example, carbon markets are somewhat dysfunctional. We don't have the scalable funding for carbon removal. Economists are still debating time discounting. These are unsolved riddles and puzzles. So something's not quite right there.
Stan, it has been a through line in many of your novels, some exploration of capitalism. New York 2140 got more explicit in bringing in the idea of the global financial system. And then, of course, Ministry for the Future proposes this method of paying for things. It's an interesting, you're explicitly at the intersection, both of you, with this concept of capitalism and climate change at a time when activists are chaining themselves to banks. You know, to talk about sort of the power of finance and what has led you to these, both, I think, to these realizations that this is a mechanism for real change in a capitalist world.
Well, it is a capitalist world, and I speak as an old hippie leftist, the Vietnam era, eco-socialist at heart. But it is a capitalist world, and we're in an emergency decade, and so I now regard Keynesian stimulus, Keynesian politics and the political economy as the most effective, the most socially just method that we can deploy right now. So I would regard Dalton's plan as a targeted kind of Keynesian stimulus. And I use the analogy now, it's not a good analogy, but it's stimulating for thought. In World War II, the governments of the Allied powers took over the economies of their country in order to save themselves. The British Treasury took over the Bank of England, and what was partly private capital was put entirely and trained by governments to solve a pressing existential problem. Well, now the whole world has a pressing existential problem, which is climate change and mass extinction event. We're in a capitalist world, and it needs to be a public-private partnership. The actual work will be done by a lot of private corporations, but the payment for them may need to be directed by and even paid for in the first place by government. So this is Keynesian rather than neoliberal market ascendancy. It's not the hugest shift in the world, but I feel like for the sake of expediency, of actually doing it, of getting political support and legislative support, that this is the best thing I could think of. And so for me, Dalton's plan, which is to say, let's make a kind of carbon standard, the way there used to be a gold standard, and units of carbon are effectively the underpinning, the infrastructural underpinning of our economy. Let's use that as our unit of exchange and of value. That struck me as powerful. And it was a step beyond New York 2140, where I was proposing that we basically nationalize the banks and direct their investments as a public thing. Well, the national banks already exist. They're central banks. So that led me along this next step.
Yeah. Do you want to pick up on this thread a little bit and how you see these things intersecting?
A little, yes. There is a debate.
A lot is okay.
There are these debates between socialism and capitalism as two models. I think that's a false dichotomy. There's another debate which is a bit similar between green growth and degrowth. I think that's another false dichotomy. The model that we're putting forward is different because it's about introducing a parallel economy, a complementary economy, call it the mitigation economy with this carbon currency. And so what we end up with is two systems working together in a kind of symbiosis where resources are transferred from this consumptive mainstream economy with the fiat money and the debt into a debt-free economy. And this approach, which is macroeconomic, can rebalance our unsustainability with a new economy that would fund all of the work that people here are trying to progress and advance. So that's where I think we should explore new ideas.
And now you're working on this with Global Carbon Reward, the organization. Tell us about the kind of status of the project. And I should note here that there will be a breakout session this afternoon where we're going to explore this topic in a little bit more depth. That is obviously a fairly sophisticated financial concept. We'll get into some of those details later, but tell us for the moment kind of the status of the project and what it would take to get this to reality. Quite a lot of global financial cooperation.
Well, Molly, this project has been in stealth mode for 8 years, maybe more. And I'm not exaggerating. Many of us in our team only met physically today and this week. So I'm pleased to report that we have a fantastic team, interdisciplinary. We have banker, economist, people familiar with renewable energy projects and climate policy. And we have a strategic plan which is to raise the support we need, strategic partners, raise some money to undertake a policy demonstration. So our policy demonstration will take about 3 years, and it's designed to engage with stakeholders, in particular the decision makers in business who will be asked to mitigate quickly for the reward. And this includes all businesses, including the fossil fuel sector, all businesses in the consumptive economy, and we're also going to engage with experts in central banking, economics, and also community, ecologists, scientists, because our policy is broad enough that it can engage with all of these stakeholders. This is social science. We're not going to build a currency straight away, but the idea is to map the views and opinions to get that feedback so we can understand if this policy can trigger an exponential response that we need.
And Stan, certainly as a science fiction writer, you must be familiar with the occasions on which the things you've written come true. How does this feel for you to have adapted this research? And I don't know, I mean, the Mars trilogy felt like, to me, like reading a history of the colonization of Mars in some cases, but how does it feel to you to have adapted and advanced this and now, see it potentially develop into a solution? Is it hopeful?
Well, it's personally gratifying, but it also is a little bit terrifying in this. What I've seen, it's almost exactly 2 years since Ministry for the Future came out, and it's had a big response, and it's partly because of the practical plan that I adapted from Delton's work. But it's also because I portrayed the next 30 years going well despite chaos, defeats, disorder, things going wrong, people working hard to oppose decarbonization and the saving of the biosphere, making it their life project to wreck that project of saving the biosphere. All that's going to happen, and yet the story eventually comes out with us having squeaked through, and the hunger that people have for that story being told is what I've noticed in the last 2 years has been extraordinary, and people definitely want to hear that story, believe in this story, which is of course a kicker because it's a utopian story that you can dismiss. Oh, that won't happen. But people want it to be true, and then they work for the various parts of it, which I take it is really what this meeting is about. Everybody is one brick in a wall. The one project can do it alone, and there's going to be resistance to it and difficulties, and it's hard to get it paid for. But if all of this was to come together, then the possibilities are real and are important to work for. So I feel like it should be a genre in itself. Utopia should be a genre. It is a genre. It's one of the smallest genres on Amazon.com. Always has been. You can count them on the fingers of two hands in the whole history since Sir Thomas More, almost. But people want that story in order to orient themselves and give themselves a cognitive map for life as they go forward. In other words, what you do in the present, you're always a science fiction writer for yourself. You have the utopian side, if I do these things, things will go well. And you have the dystopian side, middle of the night, you wake up worried and thinking, oh my gosh, everything could crash. And, on the individual level, that's actually physically true someday. So dystopia is very strong. Utopia is also very strong.
Well, and we talked about this once before. It's a utopia that's grounded. I think I called it the optimism of hard work. It's utopia grounded in very complicated concepts in social science that takes years to put together. But when you look at the impact that this story has had, Dalton, you must think this is achievable.
I think it is. We're in a special time now. The world recognizes we're in a climate crisis. What's at stake is the planetary biosphere and God knows what else. So to sum up, I would say we could look at our situation as a glass half empty or a glass half full. When I look at the situation, I see central banks, I see the network for greening the financial system, I see all this marvelous new technology, the internet, central bank digital currencies and so on. It's all there. What we're missing is the story for how it all fits together to provide the finance to resolve these economic problems we have with funding carbon removal and conventional mitigation at speed and scale. I think it can be done. We just need to have clarity in the economics and the concepts to support it and advance it at the right time.
Yeah. Well, if you would like a little more of that clarity, please join us for, again, a deep dive into this topic with these two and some other very smart panelists this afternoon. Thank you so much, Kim Stanley Robinson, Dr. Dalton Chen. What a pleasure.
Thank you, Molly.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Molly. So we're going to shift now. Oh, there's people in the back. If you'd like to find a seat, let's experiment with something. If you have a seat open next to you, raise your hand. Cool. If you want to sit down, find one of those hands. You're welcome. Come on in. So we're going to shift now to where, you can put your hands down. Yeah. Shifting now to where finance and policy intersect. It has been a historic year for us here in the United States of climate progress, with the recent passage of a new wave of laws and executive orders that are set to unlock massive investment in climate tech. And I could not imagine anyone more well-suited to address what this means for climate, for clean energy, and for communities than a longtime friend of Green Biz, the U.S. Secretary of Energy, joining us straight from Capitol Hill, the U.S. Secretary of Energy, Jennifer Granholm.
Thank you so much, Shauna, and hello, everybody. It is such a treat to join all the rabble-rousers and innovators and change makers that Verge always draws. This might be the 10th year for this conference, but really from my vantage point, there has never been a better time to be working in climate tech. That's because going forward, thanks to the president's leadership, the full force of the federal government is going to be squarely behind climate action and clean energy deployment. This administration took office aiming to put the country on track to cut carbon pollution in half by the end of this decade and make our electricity sector 100% clean by 2035, and then reach net zero by 2050. Took some time and more than a few trials and tribulations, but we now have the legislation to make it happen. Of course, it starts with the bipartisan infrastructure law, this body of laws that define the president's climate agenda, and the bipartisan infrastructure law is the backbone. And that makes an historic investment to build greater resilience into our physical infrastructure, including the power grid, and to lay down new supply chains, and to develop and demonstrate next generation technologies with enormous potential to revitalize economies and create good paying jobs. I'm talking clean hydrogen and carbon capture and enhanced geothermal, advanced nuclear, next generation batteries, utility scale storage, and more. And then the Chips and Science Act, the BRAIN, which invests in cutting edge science and innovation, and it boosts American manufacturing of semiconductors, which is of course a key ingredient in clean energy technologies. And then last, but certainly not least, the third piece of legislation is the Inflation Reduction Act, which we call the lungs, breathing life into the country's clean energy industries by incentivizing businesses to put real skin in the game with American parts and American labor. So all told, these three pieces, this agenda, is going to marshal roughly $500 billion for clean energy deployment and climate action. And that doesn't even count the funding that's going to flow in from a private sector that sees real certainty now in these spaces. This agenda makes massive investments in place-based solutions, recognizing that no one community is the same, that all these communities have unique resources and advantages that they can use then to carve out new opportunities in the clean energy economy. And it makes massive investments in equity and environmental justice, with tens of billions of dollars covered under the Justice 40 initiative, which directs 40% of the benefits from the federal clean energy and climate action into disadvantaged communities, whether those communities are on the front lines of climate change or on the fence lines of fossil fuel facilities or at the edge of the transition after helping to power our nation for the past 100 years. The president's agenda gives us a real shot at making America the world leader in a global clean energy market that's projected to reach $23 trillion at a minimum by the end of this decade. And it gives us a shot at using the spoils of that market to revitalize local economies. And of course, it puts our climate goals within reach. Of course, to make the most of all these opportunities, we have to put millions of Americans to work and good paying, high quality jobs that offer a chance to join a union and a pathway to the middle class. We need contractors installing heat pumps. We need electricians that are setting up rooftop solar. We need engineers planning new wind farms. We need manufacturing workers on assembly lines and new plants. We need mine workers and smelters building up our supply chains. We need line workers beefing up the grid, and on and on and on. And yes, I mean we, you, me, everyone gathered together at Verge, because as stunning as these three legislative accomplishments are, bipartisan infrastructure law, the CHIPS Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, right now, they're just lines of text. And we need your help to translate those lines of text into transmission lines, into dollars out the door and shovels in the ground. Because so much of the funding in these bills is in the form of either competitive grants or tax incentives for new projects or rebates for consumer purchases. So to the businesses that are out there, send us proposals for big, bold, clean energy projects, proposals with maximum potential to create good paying jobs and deliver environmental justice and make an impact in the fight against climate change. In fact, for the first time ever, we're evaluating applications for whether and how they generate meaningful, measurable benefits for workers and the communities that they live in. So to the investors, get investing so we can accelerate this transition as quickly as possible. To the innovators, work with us to drive these next generation technologies like clean hydrogen and advanced nuclear and geothermal and CCUS and more. And to the policymakers and the civil servants, help us get the word out that the federal government is handing out money for energy efficiency upgrades. Every one of you has a role to play here. And there is just no time to waste and no limit to the opportunity ahead. I mean, if you think back 10 years ago to that first year for this Verge conference, think about what the world looked like then. What federal action on climate and clean energy looked like then. Where the international community stood at that point. I don't know, would you have guessed that today in the US, utility scale solar would be a third cheaper than natural gas, that onshore wind would be almost half the cost, that EV sales would be skyrocketing, and that around the world 40 million people would be working in clean energy? Would you have thought it? The pace of the progress to date has really been breathtaking. And yet, with President Biden's agenda, we are truly just getting started. So imagine what the world might look 10 years on from today at Verge 32. Better yet, instead of imagining, let's get busy building that world together. Back to you, Shauna.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Secretary. So I am delighted to welcome a new voice to the Verge stage, someone whose wisdom is grounded in over 2 decades of experience working across industries and across sectors, and perhaps most importantly in communities around the world. So here to shed insight into what it looks like, what it means in practice to center frontline voices for a just transition, please join me in welcoming UC Berkeley professor Charisma AC.
Thank you so much, Sean. Thank you so much, Shauna. Good morning, everyone. Just reflecting on Secretary Granholm's remarks, she just laid out a really exciting vision for a future, right, where billions of federal dollars will flow into technology innovation, research, investment in frontline communities to address climate change. But there's a real chance, more likely than not, that most of that money will do little to address the real impacts of climate change or the causes. And that's because we have a real bias when it comes to climate science and technology. Here you see an image from 2 weeks ago in Lokoja, Nigeria. Nigeria is one of the countries where I carry out research. Severe flooding from rainfall, which experts say is driven by the climate crisis, led to emergency releases from dams in both Nigeria and Cameroon, and catastrophic flooding that killed over 600, displaced 1 million, destroyed farmland, refugee settlements, and has left devastation in its wake, similar to the recent catastrophic flooding from torrential monsoons in Pakistan. Similarly, more than almost 2,000 killed, tens of millions displaced, and just devastation in its wake. The irony of this impacting countries like Nigeria and Pakistan are that they've only contributed 1% of global emissions that's driving global warming and the crisis that we're currently in. And yet they're ground zero. They're on the front lines as countries, and then of course the most vulnerable in those countries. This begs the question of climate justice and even calls for climate reparations. Climate justice shifts the conversation about climate change from greenhouse gas emissions and end-of-pipe solutions like spraying sulfur in the atmosphere to civil rights and human rights of those most impacted, who are experiencing the first and worst impacts of climate change. And the same inequalities, the same global inequalities that we see playing out in terms of impacts also drive research into climate change. A study was done last year where scientists use machine learning to review 100,000 climate studies and found something. They were trying to estimate the human impacts of climate change, how many people are already experiencing the effects, but they found something even more surprising, that 2 to 1 climate studies are mostly done in Europe and North America, compared to places in Africa or island nations that are losing their territory to sea level rise. So there's a hole in our understanding about the impacts of climate change. Similarly, this inequality even affects our sensors, like satellites. So the very sensors that read the sun's reflection from the Earth's surface and tell us what the temperature is, where we get our readings and estimates of average global warming, they rely on algorithms that have to be ground-truthed by validation stations on the ground. Well, there's an inequality in where those stations are located. The vast majority are near universities that have the funding in the global north. There are only a handful in the entire continent of Africa, and yet Africa has vastly different patterns of rainfall and weather than in the global north. So even our understanding what that disparity, what scientists are starting to talk about in terms of that disparity, is that we're underestimating how much global warming is actually occurring. The planet is hotter than we think it is, and we're experiencing more impacts than we think we are. So that's part of what I want to talk about when it comes to the title of this talk, There Is No Way. And I reflect on this when I think about what motivated me to get into international humanitarian relief and development in the first place, and what drives my research on poverty reduction and environmental justice as an academic. This is a reflection of public housing projects I was born in Newark, New Jersey, Hayes Homes. And Newark, almost the entire city of Newark was redlined by the Federal Housing Administration. And redlining is a practice many of you probably have heard of, that led to disinvestment in inner cities all across the country, and that restricted the residential movement of black families and facilitated white flight. And you can actually see this federal practice when you go down the halls of my elementary school, Cleveland Elementary. You see the changing faces of children in the class pictures for each class over the years. Well, the consequences of that were devastating, in the sense that most of Newark is a frontline polluted dumping ground for the global economy based on consumerism. There is no way. Similarly, right here in the Bay Area, port communities like West Oakland, where thousands of trucks emitting diesel and particulates and black soot come in and out of the neighborhood every single day along the freeways and through the streets, connecting with warehouses in the neighborhood that act as magnet sources for these mobile sources of pollution, and connect to ports that are bringing goods to and from the global economy, are leading to disproportionate rates of cancer and asthma, and actually an 11-year discrepancy in life expectancy between residents of the flats nearest to the port and those who are more relatively affluent in the hills of Oakland. So we need to talk about systems change, not just climate change. We live in the era of the Anthropocene, where human impacts on the planet are causing global level change on an increasingly urbanized planet. Here I have an illustration from California's fourth climate assessment, from a business as usual scenario, from looking at conversion. You can see the red and the black of conversion from urban and agricultural land spreading over the green. And this kind of reflects what you saw in the first study published in Science in 1997, where a group of scientists laid out the systems model of human domination of Earth's ecosystems, and how population size and resource use were causing changes in Earth's biogeochemistry, leading to biodiversity loss as well as climate change. And what all of these models and diagrams, they're helpful in understanding the drivers of climate change. They're even sophisticated, but they leave out a lot. They leave out the inequality among people that's driving exploitation of land, labor, and resources that are the true drivers of climate change. And we have to talk about, as much as we're talking about mitigation, and we're excited about the potential of addressing emissions, we have to talk about adaptation, because the 5th Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has told us that there are already some consequences of the climate crisis that we cannot come back from. Whether it's the melting of the ice sheet of Greenland, warming oceans, sea level rise, these impacts that we're feeling are going to continue to be felt. We're trying to slow them down now. We can't stop them. So we have to talk about adaptation at the same time as we talk about mitigation. And to do that, we're going to need the voices of frontline communities to address both. And as we're going to see, there's a connection between mitigation and adaptation. Last summer, a colleague and I and our students, she's in public health, we did a study looking across the country regionally the connections between climate disasters and social vulnerability by region in the United States. And what we found is that racialized disparities and other disparities associated with extreme climate hazards can be traced to inequalities in funding, in policies, and practices. And so frontline voices are going to be critical in addressing both the causes and consequences of climate change. This is an image from work in Columbus, Ohio, mental maps of residents. So this was a project for urban retrofit, green adaptation, but a community-driven redevelopment project for urban retrofit in Columbus, Ohio. And what we're seeking to do is to do redevelopment and green infrastructure investments and bring urban agriculture and food security and things that would both address climate change but benefit residents of community in a way that wouldn't displace them and cause what many scholars and activists are calling green gentrification. And so we started with hand-drawn maps of residents, mental models of their neighborhoods, turn these individual mental models into social maps and then into spatial data sets and geographic information systems where we could overlay them with other forms of data and actually actually transform redevelopment in the neighborhood in a way that reduced displacement. Similarly, Aclima, working with residents and leaders like Ms. Margaret Gordon and who created the West Oakland Environmental Indicators Project, ground truth their mobile and stationary sensors with residents, with bucket brigades measuring air quality block by block, which is revolutionizing our understanding of air quality and revealing the connections between black carbon, soot, methane, short-lived climate pollutants that are actually 45% of emissions and are actually an easy-to-target solution to our climate crisis. Methane has a huge global warming potential, much more than CO2, but it's also connected to the formation of ground-level ozone that's causing respiratory deaths a million respiratory deaths around the world. So by addressing local pollution, we're also addressing the global climate crisis. In my last few slides, I just want to talk about the potential of other forms of hyperlocal data. This is San Francisco's 311 hotline data. Here you can see hotspots of sewage backup and flooding and pipe breaks. And this is a useful data set. What if we could do more with this, like have real-time resident experience of neighborhood and combine that with data on rising groundwaters that are disrupting wastewater infrastructure that runs beneath our streets. We're creating digital twin models. This is one of Shanghai that are combining sensor GIS data into real-time 3D visual models. These are amazing new innovations. Most of them are being used for closed systems like airports or single systems like transportation systems. What if we could bring lived experience and hyperlocal data into these kinds of innovations? What if we could combine experiential knowledge of frontline communities, cultural and spiritual knowledge of indigenous and traditional communities, and combine it with mainstream knowledge and really address the climate crisis, both the drivers and its impacts. If this is something that interests you and motivates you and inspires you, I would love to connect. Thank you so much.
I'm Sarah Golden, VP of Energy with GreenBiz. It's an exciting time for clean energy. This summer, the United States passed the most ambitious climate legislation ever, with tremendous incentives to deploy carbon-free technologies. Meanwhile, the war in Ukraine has reminded nations and communities of the necessity of decoupling from petrostates. And the volatile cost of fossil fuels makes the stability of clean energy technologies look increasingly attractive. What's more, the economics are sound. Wind and solar are the cheapest forms of energy on a levelized cost basis. All of these add up to my most overhyped trend of 2022, that the clean energy transition is inevitable. Now, I am delighted that the stars are aligning for clean energy. But if we assume clean energy deployments are unstoppable, we risk glossing over critical gaps that need to be addressed to fully displace dirty energy resources. We still need to figure out cheap, long-duration energy storage, firm energy resources, and energy-dense fuels for heavy industry, just to name a few. And parts of the grids aren't yet capable of handling massive new renewable capacity and storage. Trusting momentum alone may result in energy buyers avoiding investments in the critical, less mature, more complicated technologies that need to scale. Which brings me to my most underhyped trend: tailored, location-specific investments that help accelerate the adoption of clean, firm energy resources. These technologies like geothermal, thermal energy storage, and small modular nuclear reactors require leaders to do the hard work to figure out how to deploy them for a variety of applications. It will be complex. There will be friction. It may initially be more expensive, which is precisely why early movers must act swiftly. We need you to champion a surfeit of new climate tech to truly break our reliance on fossil fuels.
I'm Isaac Nipping, Buildings Analyst with GreenBiz. There's a lot of excitement around decarbonizing buildings and bold tech solutions catalyzing this transformation. My overhyped trend is a myopic focus on deploying new technologies to reach decarbonization goals. Don't get me wrong, we need technology to decarbonize the built environment. The materials, construction, and operations of buildings account for nearly 40% of greenhouse gas emissions, and new technologies will be crucial to eliminate those. But without thoughtful training and implementation, new systems alone can lead to complexity and frustration. Building contractors and operators are increasingly required to install and manage a wide array of advanced building management and all-electric systems that could decarbonize, but often are installed without proper training or holistic consideration of a building's existing configuration. We now have the technology and political tailwinds to electrify and decarbonize buildings, and we need thoughtful design and implementation to ensure they are performing as intended. New tech alone won't deliver the full promise of decarbonized buildings. People will. This brings me to my underhyped trend: energy efficiency. I know, efficiency is boring to talk about. Yet energy efficiency basics still aren't being realized, and we still are falling behind global targets. Efficiency is critical to meet net zero goals, and upgrades usually pay for themselves. 80% of the economic potential of energy efficiency in buildings remains untapped, largely due to non-technical barriers. That's $1.4 trillion a year of economic potential sitting on the table. What's more, efficiency solutions are better than ever, offering superior comfort, indoor environmental quality, and lower utility costs, not to mention human health and well-being. The explosion of energy efficiency technologies allows customers to significantly reduce energy use without high upfront costs, and make all other fancy technologies more effective and affordable. Let's not forget the fundamentals. Why pay more for decarbonization when you don't have to? After all, the cheapest kilowatt hour is the one you never have to buy.
Give it up for our Verge analysts and their takes on over-unders. So before we transition into our two closing keynotes for the day, I want to take a moment to extend again some acknowledgments. First to our partners, our vast community of partners, convening partners, community partners, accelerate partners. Thank you so much for your work and helping us convene this incredible community of people. That's all of you. Thank you to our net zero media and sustainability partners as well. And also to our sponsors. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Over 100 this year for recognizing the power of Verge as a platform for supporting the growth of this community. We couldn't do it without you. And on that note, I'm very excited to take a moment right now to officially announce the launch here at Verge this week of Amazon's Future Forward documentary series, a series of short documentary films telling the stories of climate pledge signatory companies. You can join us for the film premieres in the expo hall at the Climate Pledge stage, where the films will be followed by panel discussions with signatory company leaders, among others. And here, we're going to give you a short preview of a short trailer preview of the Future Forward series.
We know as an industry we are an emitter of carbon.
If you're in any industry and you're not thinking about climate change, I don't know what you're thinking about.
Our mission is to be net zero by 2040.
We found partners to put that plan in motion, and that's what we're doing today.
Collectively, we can get a lot further than if we continue by ourselves down this path.
We take carbon dioxide, put it into concrete. It's a permanent removal of carbon.
Our goal is to put 100,000 electric vans on the road by 2030.
This is sustainable aviation fuel. This is the future.
As practical farmers, we stand up businesses and farms that are going to be resilient.
We need to invest in nature, reforest areas while providing food to all of us.
Saya harus bersama-sama.
It's time for companies to do their part.
No one else is going to magically make this happen. It's on us.
Thank you so much, Amazon, for your partnership. We're so excited to be a platform for this launch. So we're going to transition now into our two closing keynotes today, both of which focus in very different ways on something we haven't yet discussed yet at Verge. One of the most essential life support systems and climate regulating systems on our planet, our global ocean. And I'm so delighted to welcome our next panel, hosted by Kakani Khatija of the Monterey Bay Aquarium's Bio-Inspiration Lab, including Alani Wilhelm from the White House Office of Science, Technology, and Policy, and Esri's very own Deep Sea Dawn. Please welcome these amazing women.
Lovely, and it's lovely for all of you to be able to join us. When I was asked to moderate this panel and they told me who was going to be on this panel, I was totally fangirling. Because, you know, Dawn is one of the first Black people to have ever reached the deepest depths of the ocean in Marianas Trench. And then Alani has played a critical role in establishing one of the largest marine protected areas in Hawaii, in the world, but based in Hawaii. So we're really, really fortunate to be hearing from these two lovely individuals, and I get to ask some cool questions. So thank you. So to start, you know, we've heard a lot, I think, about solutions that, you know, the community here is trying to come up with, you know, that address conservation, revitalization of our natural world. And how, though, should we center the ocean in these solutions that we're trying to come up with? You know, maybe Alani, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I mean, first of all, it's just such a pleasure to be here talking about the ocean. How can we be talking about climate without talking about the ocean? So, you know, let's start. I mean, the ocean and atmosphere really are one big fluid mass. completely connected, right? The ocean is, really is what created all life on the planet, and it drives all living systems on Earth. So, when we think about climate, we often think about the atmosphere and we think about the impacts that are happening above water. But those impacts that we're experiencing on land are really because of the impacts that have already occurred and are continuing to occur in the ocean, right? So, like, simply put, climate change is ocean change. And if we want to stabilize the planet, we have to stabilize the ocean. I don't mean to make it so simple, but really, that's clear. And we need to do that, of course, by reducing carbon and other greenhouse gases, right? So we can stay in those globally agreed upon targets that have been set. But we also need to take the pressure off, the wrong type of pressure off of the ocean, right? The ocean has already been quite literally taking the heat from global warming, right? 90% of all the warming and about a third of all the carbon that's been released across the decades have been absorbed by the ocean. And science is telling us that the ocean can do even more, right? Things like restoring coastal and ocean systems, really carbon-rich systems that we know they are, could provide maybe even a fifth, right? 20% of the carbon capture that's required to get those numbers that we've been talking about down, right? And maybe even more, but only if we are not, again, overpressuring the system so that it can't provide those things that we want. And it's why, really, in order to do these kinds of things, explore things like carbon capture through restoration, the Biden administration is working on an ocean climate action plan, right? And why? To basically identify what else could be possible out there, prioritize what those might be, and then what might sound boring but is incredibly important is coordinate across all of the government. And that's a big job in and of itself, right? To see what possibly can be done. And in the US or globally, right, none of this can really happen without incredible focus and investment. And it's not just in the science and tech, right? Not that stuff's the easy stuff. It's important and it's hard, but also in creating the markets, right? In figuring out the appropriate finance mechanisms and looking at how do we actually develop the appropriate supply chains, all of that kind of stuff, right? The market potential in really looking at these ocean solutions, these ocean climate solutions, is really big. And, humanity is really relying on that potential in order for us to be able to have a livable planet.
Absolutely. I would love to add to that. Everybody take a deep breath. Exhale. 50% of that oxygen comes from the ocean. Yes. So the ocean not only is buying us valuable time in terms of the whole climate change crisis that we're battling, as Aulani just pointed out here, but it's essential for our well-being regardless of where we live on this planet. It's not just for coastal communities or islanders. All three of us here are island women. It's for everyone. And one of my good friends is Peter Domenical. He is the director of the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution in Massachusetts. And he says that we just are not going to be able to get to these climate objectives without the ocean. We cannot get there without the ocean. And that includes the investment, the climate tech investment from venture capital. One of the things that I just found out, I'm a scientist, I'm not a financier or an economist, but I just found out that among all of the billions of dollars that are being invested venture capital-wise in climate tech, less than 1% of that is in the ocean, despite what the ocean is giving us, despite the fact that 71% of the planet is ocean. This is an ocean planet. So my friend Peter, he and his friends at Propeller Venture Capital just announced last week $100 million of venture capital funding in the ocean. And so that is starting right now. It's going to start with a partnership between Propeller and Woods Hole Oceanographic, but other startups, including at MBARI, Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, are welcome. So this is huge news. I was expecting to hear applause, So thank you. $100 million is not trivial. It's a very good start.
That's fantastic news. I have not heard about that either. So lots and lots of opportunity in the ocean, and clearly we already get so much from it. Another topic that I would love to talk about is exploration and mapping, which I know this is something that Don has been involved with for several years. And how do you think these new expeditions or new approaches will help us to center the ocean in these climate solutions that the community is trying to come up with?
Well, it's really hard to understand or protect something that we have not mapped in totality. All of the numbers that Alani gave you in terms of what we know, how much time the ocean is buying us in terms of absorbing carbon dioxide and 90% of the heat, all of that comes from a global observation network of robots and sensors in the ocean. And that continues to grow. The numbers of those sensors grows every day. In fact, what's happening now is that these sensors are going to be more sustainable in terms of not littering the ocean with more of this human influence, but the ability for them to come back and then to go back. And that was one of the most exciting things that happened to me this summer, because we are now able to reach the deepest part of the ocean with robots, but also with our human perception. We are able to go. And I was able to dive to 6.7 miles depth into Challenger Deep, the deepest part of the Mariana Trench, the deepest part in the ocean, as Kakani mentioned. What do you think the first thing we saw there was? It was a beer bottle. It was very, very disheartening. We saw, it was just in the first couple of minutes, and we saw amazing things afterwards. And we also mapped that remotest part of the ocean with a special sonar instrument, because we only have about 23.4% of the global ocean floor mapped. So this is essential. It is wonderful to think about the stars and to think about the moon and Mars. All of that is wonderful, but we have got to get a handle on our own planet. It is still our only planet. And thank you. And so this mapping is essential, and all three of us have been involved in mapping projects, which continue.
Yeah, Alani, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, what Don's talking about, right? We've all heard that statistic. We know more about the moon, the surface of the moon, than the ocean, and that is changing thanks to people like Don that are pushing on that and also bringing that human perception, right? How do we match? And it relates to the conversation that we were having yesterday, right? About bringing in the people side of all of this. How do we do that? And really, because this is changing, because it needs to change quickly, we think about, well, what kind of science do we need, right? Well, if we want to do some of these tech solutions, right? If we want to actually tackle climate, then we need monitoring, right? How do we know what the ocean's doing for sequestering? How can we realize that 20% potentially or more of carbon capture? What might be happening to the biodiversity if we're doing that? We need to monitor all of that, right? We also need to go to these places. It's not just cool to go to the deepest part of the ocean. It's actually necessary, right? How do we understand these parts of the ocean that we really don't, so that we don't make decisions in the future or even now without fully understanding what might be then irreversible decisions that are created that could have been avoidable, right? And if you're thinking about, technologies that we want to do offshore wind or energy development, or we want to site a clean aquaculture facility, we need to know about bathymetry, right? We need to understand what's on the floor. So this science is not only cool and important because we don't know it, but it's super practical, right? If we think about what are the best solutions, what I love about this gathering, and it's my first Verge conference, right, is that we're talking about solutions. And what are the best solutions? In my opinion, it's when imagination meets evidence, right? You need both. And you can get those both from the kind of data and the visualization, products and tools, and you can get it at the bottom of the ocean and looking. And whether it's sad to see that bottle, it also is going to drive us to think about how does that not happen, kind of moving forward, right? And I think, bottom line is we need these solutions now. Never before has humanity faced this confluence of crises that we find ourselves in. So never before has really there been the driving need for us to really bring these kinds of necessary solutions together that create the solutions without causing more harm.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. And, something I do want to add too is, the number, the 20 or 25% of the ocean bottom that has been mapped at the same level of detail as, the moon and Mars. That's something we commonly think about, we talk about, but then the ocean is this massive volume. It represents 97% of the habitable volume on this planet. And taken in concert, we've only probably seen about 1% of that. Yeah. So it's the paucity, right, of the knowledge that we have about this place is also a big challenge. Okay, well, I think we're going to go to the sidebar and try and grab a question from over there.
Yeah, so thank you for this really amazing conversation so far. So the ocean serves as potentially a resource for all the materials and minerals that we need to power the clean economy. So what's your take on that? And I think we want to start with Don.
Yeah, that's a very good question in terms of the so-called seabed mining. And there is potential on the seabed for copper, manganese, cobalt, and nickel, not so much for lithium. But I think there's consensus in the scientific community that we need to go very slowly on this, and in many areas we need to pause, because we've just given you the statistics in terms of how little we know about the ocean, how little we know about the seabed. And we would just like a bit more time to characterize and to understand that environment before we dive in, pun intended, to mine these areas. We don't know the consequences yet. We need these studies. There's also evidence that with ocean trawling for fishing, that is kicking up on the seabed the equivalent of the global aviation industry in terms of carbon dioxide emissions. So we want to be very careful there. That is a published study by colleagues of ours from the National Geographic. And so we just need to take it slow, is I think the consensus of the scientific community. And also, with regard to lithium, there are some very interesting solutions that are on our doorstep. For instance, I live near the Salton Sea, which is a place that is environmentally in much trouble, but if handled properly, the Salton Sea could provide all of the US supply of lithium just from that one site. If we are able to handle the geothermal extraction properly, if we can extract lithium from existing geothermal energy plants, from those brines, and then also to create low salinity ponds for the birds and other species to recover in the Salton Sea. That is one answer that we being scientists would like to see pursued, and it is being pursued right now with state funds, a budget surplus of state funds. So that's my take.
Alani, do you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Maybe just briefly that, any use of marine resources, right, it's complicated. It's complicated environmentally, it's complicated from social justice issues, from sovereignty issues, and, the list goes on. And it's, when we talk about essential or important minerals and metals, it's really no different, particularly when demand is continuing to increase. So, how might we, right, the types of entrepreneurial questions that get asked, how might we look at reducing our demand, right? How can tech change and evolve so that what we're producing right, is actually uses less or different things, right? We never had the things we're using now that are requiring these. So what might we be able to do differently? And do we really have a handle on how much of these metals and minerals, well, that's a new word, are already out there that might be reused or recycled? And how do we look at the investments in being able to do that? And in the list that the Secretary of Energy just talked about, right, this administration is investing in things like earth minerals and metals recycling, and looking at investments in new battery tech to take some of that pressure off. And then, Don talked about new science and things that we're learning, like what might be happening when we're trawling the bottom. Some science also has come out recently that talks about the first meter of the seafloor alone has more carbon, is holding more carbon than all terrestrial soils combined. Right, so that it might be prudent for us to think about, how do we make sure that we're not, in the effort to reduce our carbon or carbon capture elsewhere, developing and using machinery or tech that requires us to disturb it, where it's, pretty firmly in place at the moment.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. And we're running out of time, unfortunately, but any advice you might want to give to people who would like to work in this space or center the ocean in their solutions? Maybe
propellervc.com.
Check that out. And then,
well, yeah. I would think that, if there's one thing to think about in terms of ocean climate solutions, that, we're writing the rules right now. So it might be like the early days of the internet, right? That if you can bring or create a venture that delivers solutions that can not only deliver goods to people and society, but protects the future of the ocean and the future of really life on the planet, right? You're going to be at the governance table right away, right now, right? And that's super important, right? The question isn't really, can the ocean help to deliver some of these solutions? We know already that it can. The question is really how, right? How can those solutions be delivered responsibly, equitably, delivered to people, for one thing? We just had a big conversation about that. And also, how can we do that? How can we build on what the ocean can deliver, but do it in a way that doesn't cause more harm? That's really the challenge that's out there, right? But again, the market potential is out there, and we really need to figure this out.
Yeah. Well, incredible. Well, thank you to Don Wright and Alani Wilhelm for their input.
Thank you, Kakani.
So let's go. If you have any questions, you can find us.
Okay.
Thank you so much. So we're going to keep riding this wave. Thank you. So one of the things that I invoked in my opening remarks yesterday about the power of this community is the way in which our work and the solutions that we're here at Verge accelerating have the potential to create cascading benefit. And our next speaker's work is doing just that. Solving climate change, regenerating ecosystems, revitalizing communities, and the lens that she brings is the power of art in doing so. And I am so delighted to welcome to the Verge stage the co-founder of Global Coalition, Angeline Chen, for her Verge talk, followed by a very special performance that has been co-created just for you at Verge 22. Please welcome Angeline.
I'd love to invite you all to take 2 deep breaths together right now. So we're going to inhale and exhale. Let's do one more inhale and exhale. Just be grateful for your breath today. It's our most basic human need, and it's our connection to life. Are these changing? Oh, here we go. So that first breath is thanks to our land plants, our rainforests and our trees, our grasses, our leaves. And that second breath is thanks to our oceans, our phytoplankton and our kelp. Our oceans produce over half of the oxygen we breathe, and our coral reefs are the rainforests of the sea. They support 25% of all marine life, and they support 1 billion people worldwide with food and livelihood. In the last 30 years, we've lost half of our reefs, and we're estimated to lose 90% by 2050. And yet, scientists have found that because of the rapid recovery rates of marine ecosystems, we can actually rebuild marine life by 2050 with the right interventions. There have been amazing breakthroughs in coral science, and we can actually grow coral up to 50 times faster on land. Marine protection can restore fish populations while creating local food security. And by working with fishermen to grow mangroves, we can create stable livelihood, sequester carbon, create natural fish habitats, and filter and cool water. Mangroves actually sequester 4 times more carbon than our rainforests. And by bringing conservation into the ecotourism and education space, we can uplift communities, economies, and our ecosystems. There are 50 reefs identified by the Ocean Agency as an optimum portfolio of reefs to conserve. And if restored, these reefs could reseed neighboring regions over time. So at Global Coalition, we're using art as a catalyst to activate communities, build local partnerships, and bring these key solutions to the ground. Art is a powerful catalyst. Art creates a visceral experience, and it invites you in. Art transcends time and space, it transcends language and borders, and it communicates beyond the rational mind. The ancient Greeks spoke of it as the spiritual world permeating into human affairs. To be kissed by the muse, or to have inspiration strike, is a window into the realms of infinite potential. In the climate crisis, I believe this is what we need. We have the science, we know the facts, and what we need to do is unlock our human potential. Unlock our collective imagination of what is possible and what we are capable of, and that we can live in harmony and we can thrive as a human civilization on planet Earth. When I was 10, my dad took me to dive on the Great Barrier Reef, and 10 years later, I fell in love with my first reef in Thailand. I witnessed it die within about 2 years, and that changed the course of my life. My father, he grew up in China during the Cultural Revolution, and in middle school, he was sent to become a rice farmer. He later became a biochemist and a painter, and in 2018, his work won a Nobel Prize. His work has been used by coral scientists around the world to study how corals can become more resilient to our changing pH levels and changing ocean temperatures. When we unite art and science, we unite the heart and the mind. And so we launch every project with a sculpture that we deploy into the ocean to become a coral reef. Our current Thank you. Our current project is in the Dominican Republic, and we launched it in early 2020 and started it by visiting schools. We shared the intention of our project, and the kids were so engaged and inspired, and they asked questions like, where did the very first coral come from, and what will happen if we lose them? We learned about the 4,000 years of indigenous history on the island before colonization arrived, and we learned that there's less than 10% living tissue left on the island today. One of the schools inspired created a play, and one of the women embodied the voice of Anakaona, who's an indigenous chief. She spoke to Atabe, the mother of the waters, and asked her why our reefs were dying and what they could do. Atabe, she rules over the rain, the rivers, fresh water, fertility, the moon, and she gives birth to the sea, and she became the inspiration of our sculpture. We were guided by indigenous elders and leaders and the community to bring this project to life. And Atabe went viral across the island. She became a cultural phenomenon, and she catalyzed partnerships for us with local ecologists, divers, surfers, youth, and local officials. In the last 2 years, our local partners have marine protected Sosua Bay and launched a local project with the fishermen growing mangroves. We've been given land to build a solar-powered land-based coral farm to grow 1 hectare of coral reef. And with our local partners who have planted 2 million mangroves in Haiti, we've been given 1,000 hectares of land to grow 10 million mangroves in the Dominican Republic, which will sequester 3 million tons of carbon over their lifetime while supporting communities, filtering water, and creating natural habitats. Atebe brought people together. She became a symbol for this collective movement. She struck a chord in the community. She's a symbol of their ancestry and a vision for the future. Art is one of our oldest forms of human expression. We record our lives through art. We define our human experience by the cultures we create, and culture is guided by art. Da Vinci said, "Art is the queen of all sciences, communicating knowledge to all the generations of the world." Art can raise awareness about climate, and it can also invite people into the climate space, making it inspiring, inclusive, and participatory. Art can change people, and people change the world. We aim to bring our project to the 50 reef sites in hopes to build the cultural monuments of our time and accelerate social and ecological regeneration. I'd love to just invite 2 last breaths together today. So let's inhale and exhale. Let's do 1 more inhale and exhale. Thank you so much.
Mic check, 1, 2. Can you hear me? Give it up for Angeline one more time. That's my sister. So this is the part where the art starts. This is the part where we try to take your confusion and turn it into some Confucius. So from Nikki and Francoise and Oliver on the visuals, let's give you myself, Akil, Apollo Davis, and Hybrid Movement. You ready? In the beginning, it seems there was a single source, a seed. And with a big bang, it bloomed, sprouted roots, branched out and grew. Sparks to stars, gas to galaxies, perpetuated to planets, giving birth to Mother Earth and His Majesty. Then amidst its early oceans, creating atmospheres, ice ages, swirling skies, volcanic rages, tectonic quaking, complex life was baking. For billions of years, it brewed and eventually blossomed. You. So check this perspective. From the first human being, from every birth of every son and every daughter, to all of us now, there is one unbroken chain of water. From the seeds, we start to see that we are not apart. We are inextricably unified, you and I. So let me remind you that it took you 13.7 billion years to get here. And you are right on time. You are right on time. We have been given so much with this planet. What a fantastic galactic tapestry of art our planetary arc is. And after witnessing the power of our impact, we changed our mindset. We devised the tech. We gathered the data, and now we're trading the chatter. And as it turns out, what we are doing matters. And to some of us, it's still absurd, right? Yo, but man, I get it. It hurts when the nerds are right. Now we, like that first cosmic seed, have begun cooking our contemplations, colliding conversations, congregating, and now combining Verge with Artists on a Mission, Angie with Global Coalition. We are correlating and concocting the fruition of a more harmonious vision. Our decisions will resonate through time. How will they tell our story in the future lives? The actions we take, growing from our mistakes, siding with syncopation of the planet's palpitations as her children's wow. Let's leave a good story, because we are the soon-to-be ancestors right now. We are in a race, and we are working on the future's baton, and we must ensure it has substance and sustenance when we pass it on. Healthy water, food, and air. We're creating a culture that cares, and so when you get in your head and you feel heavy sometimes, let me offer a share. Take it one step at a time, because we together are all walking there. We have all come here because we care what happens to us. Comrades congregate, activate to change the chapter of us. Follow those contacts, and let's make the fire from our forests and our skies the fire in our feet, in our hearts, and in our eyes, right? So now, if you are ready, we are alchemizing technology so that you can rock it steady, so that we can water the garden and stoke your fire. This is a little dose for you to be inspired. So let's make a lotus of our future that they can admire. Aho. Ladies and gentlemen, Nikki and Francoise of Hybrid Movement, Oliver Allo on the visuals. My name is Akil Apollo Davis. It is a pleasure and an honor to be here with you. Let's get it. Thank you.
I feel like nothing wants or needs to be spoken after that. May your hearts be opened, your minds expanded as you leave this room and enter into everything that is yet to unfold in the rest of your day. That will begin with lunch. That is happening now. Buffets are next door. Please join the roundtable lunches to connect and dig deeper into so much of what is up and alive here. All access pass holders have lunch in the hall. We have concessions available here. Buffets are also available in the expo. We will have breakouts. We will have an after dark party tonight. Please join us there. Reception at 5:15. Thank you all for a beautiful Wednesday.
Wowzers.
All right, we are done with day 2 of the keynotes at Verge 22. What did you think?
Wow. As the smoke clears from that amazing art show we just saw at the end, that was great. I think I'm learning now to not try to pick my winners beforehand because everything is awesome.
Definitely. Well, something that stood out to me in our last minute of this virtual program, Dawn Wright, she said we have got to get a handle on our own planet. It's still our only planet. I feel like that was the line that really stood out to me during their conversation.
Yeah, that was so great. I'm thinking back to the first talk by Gavin McCormick from Watt Time. You know, I'm a huge data nerd, so sort of looking at how we can use data to better target our investments to actually address this and, get a handle on our own planet was pretty cool.
Definitely. So please join us tomorrow. We have one more day of keynotes. I think it's about an hour and a half. It starts at 10:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And we will be here. Well, I will be here again. John will not, but I'll be here with Sarah Golden tomorrow. Looking forward to seeing you all then.
Thanks, everybody.